Hey, church, just another week. Want to fill you in on a couple of thoughts that have to do with the message over the last couple of weeks, the culture that we live in, and kind of just some things I've been thinking about. I'm just experimenting with this kind of short form video, just trying to bring you a couple minutes of thoughts and try to bring some engagement to our Christian faith. And again, even though this is kind of a unidirectional, one directional video, this hopefully can bring up some questions and thoughts and ways for us to be thinking about so that we can apply and engage our culture with wisdom, grace, discernment, and love. This morning, I want to spend a few minutes talking about sexual ethics of all things, partially because it deals with the book of Romans, because the culture and the lives that we live now often try and find salvation in sexuality. It becomes the highest ideal, and I'll talk about that in a second. And the book of Romans continually comes back to Paul, continues to remove those things in our lives that we're trying to find salvation and to show us that nothing else works except for justification in Christ alone. So this past week, actually March 1st, the Gospel Coalition, which is a popular American organization that writes and publishes all sorts of things and makes videos and so on, and uses pastors and academics and so on to do that, to utilize that, released an article with a guy named Joshua Butler. He's a pastor in Arizona. And he's coming out with a book upcoming on sex, and so he released just a portion of that book, just an articles portion of that book. And the title of it is "Sex Won't Save You, but it points to the one who will." And he utilized Ephesians 5 to develop the metaphor of a husband and wife and the way that Christ relates to the church. And while he pointed to Ephesians 5, his use of metaphor went way overboard. He overutilized metaphor that kind of got into the uncomfortable, and people got angry. Not only with the way that he talked about sex, but the feeling of kind of the glib nature that he used to talk about sex, the way that he kind of in some cases seemed to abuse metaphor in ways that he talked about sex and its relation to Christ in the body. And there was, and still is, a lot of chatter in the Christian culture about it right now. So I want to use that just to kind of talk about the reality of the sexual ethics that we live in. I've been reading these counter articles all week, and there's actually a lot that could be said about the article itself, and I'm actually not going to talk any more about the article. I want to talk about why the article made people so angry and why there's been so much lasting conversation around it. And I think it's because sexuality is likely the primary filter our culture is using to view life through right now. Now, that's not only in a Christian culture, it's in the wider, specifically American culture, where sexuality is the primary filter through which we view things. Everything points to, or seems to point to, sexuality. And that filter, this filter of sexuality, becomes kind of the pinnacle of humanistic thinking. Humanistic thinking is just thinking through life in terms of life without God. It's removing the divine, moving God from what life looks like. And so when you do that, you have to look at what does the best life look like, and the best life that anybody who's trying to live a life outside of God, the best life looks like some level and form of sexuality. And so the culture at large views sexuality as the primary thing that matters. It's the highest ideal, is how we speak about sex in our culture. And that's just a reality of where we are. You know it, I know it. You can think about this or look at this article. You can look elsewhere in the culture and you find it everywhere. I find it everywhere. And we're kind of mired deep in this unending conversation about sexuality. And a lot could be said about that as well. But I think it's helpful that we understand how the culture views sexuality and how we approach that conversation. So I want to just give you a couple things that we can remember And again, this isn't meant to be comprehensive. It's just a couple thoughts to think about. The conversation around sexual ethics in America and in the church is wide and long-reaching, and I could spend 3 hours talking about that. And we will, in upcoming ground floors and so on, talk about this issue because it's important. But I just want to leave you with a couple things. The first is just to remember that as society and culture views the highest ideal of what it means to live through the lens of sexuality, is to remember that all sexuality is broken. In the fall, through the lens of sin, all sexuality is broken, which means that the most hypnotic view of how culture looks at the flourishing life is a broken one. All sexuality is broken. And while the Joshua Butler article went overboard, we do have to remember a truth about what he was trying to say. Karl Barth, in his commentary to the Romans, says that all things that are not of God are still a parable of what life in God can be like. Either a cautionary tale, like Jesus would tell sometimes, or a parable of what the kingdom of heaven is like. So all of life becomes a parable. And because of that, even in our hyper-sexualized, hypnotic state of the flourishing life in humanism, where sexuality is the greatest thing that we can come up with, that there's nothing better. We are, because we believe that all life is a parable, all life points to something greater, that even in that sexuality, we know that there's something larger, better out there than whatever it is we've been able to come up with on our own. And so as a church, we have to remember that we are much more than just our sexuality. Our sexuality is important, but we are much more than that. We're larger than it. We're more complicated than it. We're more valuable than any definition that can be given to it. And because of that, we don't have to remain mired in definitions and broken sexuality, but we can look to another who actually defines life as that which is whole and peaceable in shalom. That we're not just a part of our lives. That's the problem with the culture, is that it's defining itself by a part of their lives, when the reality is we're much larger than that. And our lives point to something greater than that. It points to a God who loves us in Christ and makes us whole in Him. That He grants us peace, which is shalom, which is wholeness, not just a part, but He actually restores and heals. If the greatest filter or way that people view things in the culture is just that of broken sexuality, we as the church can point to something better and greater and more whole and more perfect and redemptive and healing. Christ offers restoration and healing. He fixes that which is broken. He shows us that there's something much greater in the world than whatever it is we've tried to on our own human way define ourselves by. In Romans, the book of Romans is actually a constant reminder of that. That no matter how we've used our lives to define ourselves by or try to find salvation through, there's one who's greater, that can actually justify, that can actually heal, that can actually restore, that can actually forgive. And His name is Jesus. And our role as the church is to point past all of those things, see them as parable, and allow people and invite people to see something greater than that. So we use the dialogue and the conversation of sexual ethics and broken sexuality to have better conversations about what it means to walk fully in shalom and peace in Christ, because that's what Jesus is offering. In this, let me know if you have any questions or thoughts. Email me, text me, whatever, and I'd love to carry on the conversation.